Everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and today I'm going to talk about Inside Number 9, and this is an episode I've decided because when I put out my last post, my last text poll, I said, what would you like me to do? An Inside Number 9 episode, or a book review, or a movie review, or anything else? And the majority came back with Inside Number 9, so I decided, instead of just doing one Inside Number 9 episode, I was going to tackle two. And I'm going to choose my first Inside Number 9 episode. And I decided to tackle, after much consideration, from looking back at all the episodes and what I'd like to talk about, and also looking at the reviews for various different episodes and kind of deciding what one would I like to tackle more. And I wanted to tackle Private View, because this one is definitely one that gets a lot of praise because it has both humour and horror, and it has a very interesting, background if you know a lot about horror and, various different aspects of horror cinema. But a lot of people have criticised this particular episode for having an ending that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it has a twist that kind of just comes out of nowhere. But I think I'm going to defend the ending of this episode a little bit, and I'm going to defend this episode quite a bit because I feel like if you're familiar with the Italian giallo genre of horror, so named because a lot of Italian suspense, thriller and mystery novels were often written with a yellow cover and spine, and of course giallo is meant to be the Italian word for yellow. So if you're familiar with that kind of genre, which was popularised through those novels and later kind of given more life and more notoriety through the films of Dario Argento or the films of Mario Bava or the Butler Bava, you will know exactly what kind of a genre this particularly plays under. So the plot of Private View is that a group of strangers who are seemingly unconnected to each other attend a private art installation by Elliot Quinn, who is an artist who has since died, and he has been anonymously sending invites to these people to attend his art exhibition. It's one of those avant-garde art installations where there's a lot of mannequins, a lot of abstract art pieces, and these groups of people are meant to essentially come to it and give their own opinions and give feedback. But it seems very odd that all these random people were selected and this guy seems to have been dead, so there's an entire mystery behind that. But also there's something extra terrifying in the sense that there is a black glove killer going around killing off the guests, and they're all being picked up one by one. So right off the bat, this does have a very similar feel to it as the works of an Agatha Christie mystery, like, And Then There Were None, or Murder on the Orient Express, in the sense that it has a very closed circle trope where a group of strangers are, in this one location and they're cut off from the rest of the world. They have no escape, they have no means of making contact with other people. They just basically are there on their own, so it adds to the claustrophobia, but also adds to the suspense, because as the numbers are whittled down to very few, people start to suspect who the killer is and what their entire motivation could be. And it starts to breed, contempt and all these various other things, suspicion, all sorts of different things, suspicion, paranoia, and what have you. All these different tropes have been, personified in various different horror films throughout the many years. If you're looking at the certain slasher films of the early 80s, late 90s, like Friday the 13th or Halloween, you'll definitely, or not Halloween, but Sleepaway Camp, those sorts of stories where characters are in an isolated location. Or if you're looking at films like John Carpenter's The Thing, you can definitely see a lot of those elements being influenced by the works of Agatha Christie as well. But one of the things that I really do like about this episode is it is really funny. Like, there's a lot of really great, gags. Like, say, for example, there's this character named Carrie, who essentially is she's basically the archetypal dumb blonde. She comes into the art installation and she says to the person serving the drinks, like, excuse me, do you know if this is the art installation for Fragments by Elliot Quinn? And then the person serving the drinks goes, I have no idea. If there was only some way of finding out. And then she tilts her head to the side and she just looks to the side of her, like to the corner of her eye, and she sees that there's a big sign saying Fragments by Elliot Quinn. So this character isn't very bright, and that's one of the things that I really do like, is that the comedy is absolutely in abundance here. That there's this very wonderful gag where where a character called Patricia, who is a partially sighted novelist or visually impaired novelist, is basically talking to Carrie about her books. And she says, "Oh, I've had to up my game since, doing the old 50 Shades thing. People are having sex in all sorts of unsavory places, all sorts of strange places." And then she just goes, "Up the bum." Like, up the bum. And it's absolutely like, oh God, you dummy. And I think she was the most funny character in the entire episode. But I really do think this entire episode has lots of great comedy gold mines like that. There's even a scene where she's talking to an art lecturer critic called Maurice, and he basically says, "Oh, it's like, a teardown at Debenhams." And she's going, "Yeah, that sounds right." And then she goes, "Is that why you teach art in a collage?" Because she's meant to say college. And she's basically written as the dumb blonde character, and all these other characters basically getting killed off by one by this black-gloved killer, and they don't know who it is. And the partially sighted novelist is played by... I've got the episode here, and she's played by Felicity Kendall, who is... she was in an episode of a murder mystery series I used to watch when I was a teenager with my mum, called Rosemary in Time. She played Rosemary, and I actually found it very interesting that she plays a visually impaired character, and she has sort of the same... If you watch the episode, she has a very similar hairstyle to a character in a giallo, an Italian giallo film called Profondo Rosso, or Deep Red. And if you've seen that film, the very first victim is a blind medium character who has a very similar, very 70s blonde hairstyle to Felicity Kendall in this episode. So I thought that was a very interesting nod to Deep Red as well. So there's a lot of different references to that, but the majority of the episode is basically a murder mystery for a good 50% of it, because you're wondering who this killer could be, who this killer could potentially be, what are their motives. It has to be something connected to the artist himself, or maybe he's come back from the grave to reap revenge, kind of like a Jason Voorhees or a Freddy Krueger kind of situation. But as the numbers whittle down, we begin to realise that, oh yeah, this goes much more deeper than what we originally realise. And just to say, the spoilers for this video of Inside Number 9 coming right up for private viewing. If you want to watch this particular episode in its entirety, or watch the entire series, I recommend going to iPlayer, or if you have Sky and you speak into your remote, you can basically just watch the entire episodes on there, or you can watch it on iPlayer if you have an iPlayer account as well. It's completely for free. So you could go to either one of those places, but I would definitely recommend checking this series out. But I really do think that this episode deserves a lot of attention, because, spoiler alert, the big twist of the episode is that the killer was in fact a character by the name of Jean, played by Fiona Shaw, who was in shows like Killing Eve, and she was also in she played Aunt Petunia in the Harry Potter film series, but she was also a boarding school teacher in the film Three Men and a Little Lady. Like, she's been in a lot of different films and TV shows, and she's quite a very she's quite a very accomplished actress. So I feel like she does a very good job of playing this very unhinged psychotic mother character, who basically she hasn't got on over the death of her son, and in order to kind of deal with it, she kind of de-evolves into becoming a very twisted artist who likes to kill people instead of, actually wielding her grief and actually trying to find some shared connection with her son through this examination of using art as a means of getting over her grief with the son. She ends up killing people in quite horrific ways. And it turns out a lot of the victims do have a connection to each other. There's one character who basically had a liver transplant, but they gave themselves diabetes, eating too much. And what I really like about this episode is it really does play a very interesting misdirect with the episode, because one of its big stars is in fact Peter Kay, who is a very well-known comedian, a very well-known Manchester comedian who does a lot of stuff for comic relief, but he's mostly, you know, well-known for doing all different kinds of comedy shows like Phoenix Nights and Max and Paddy's Road to Nowhere, certain TV shows, British TV shows like that, and he would occasionally appear in shows like this where he would have a special cameo or he'd have, you know, a bigger role. But the fact that they cast a well-known actor or a well-known comedian in the main role is kind of like in one of the big roles, and he turns out to be the opening kill, is kind of a trademark of lots of horror films, lots of slasher films like Psycho with Janet Leigh, but there's also a little hint of the Scream franchise with that, because a lot of the opening kills would be very well-known familiar faces, like Drew Barrymore, like Jada Pinkett Smith, like Liv Schreiber, like all the other various opening kills of Scream 4 and various others. So there's a lot of references to that. But what's really interesting is that Jean Quinn is basically tarnishing her son's memory by having these dramatic art installations through the use of human flesh and things like that. But she's basically using these characters and taking things from them. Like, say, for example, there is a character who's played by Peter Kay who had a liver transplant. He's basically, you know, ruining his liver and giving himself diabetes by essentially eating too much. So she kills him in a very, you know, inventive way with a piece of art that she just pushes him on. And I thought that was very hilarious. But then it's also very graphic because it leaves a lot of blood on the floor and things like that. So that's the most graphic death of the lot of them. But then there's another character, Patricia, who basically got his corneas, Elliot Quinn's corneas, so she basically plucks out her eyes. And there's one character who had a kidney who they basically, you know, just ruined by drinking too much. One character who was serving the drinks had a skin graft after she basically nearly died in a fire that she started. So Fiona Shaw's character basically takes all these things, their skins, their livers, their kidneys, their lungs, everything, and even their hearts, and basically putting them on display and kind of arranging them in sort of like a closed circle, or sort of like a spider's web of sorts. And I thought that was a very interesting detail. But she basically has gone way off the deep end, and she's essentially, you know, committing murder to complete her son's masterpiece. But what's very interesting about this episode is the ending. And if you're familiar with the tropes of, or the familiar structure of a Italian giallo film, a lot of those films don't tend to operate on logic, and they tend to often rely on happy coincidences and lots of different things that just sort of neatly slip into the empty slot, but they don't do it in a way that feels like, oh, that's actually very clever. Some of them do. Some of them are very clever. Like, say, for example, there's a reveal gag where in Deep Red, the main character, who's a very well-known British actor, basically is walking down the hallway, and he says he saw a portrait of someone's face, and it was very lifelike looking, of a woman, you know, staring in shock and, you know, awe, and she looks very terrifying. But then when you actually, spoiler alert for Deep Red, by the way, but when you actually look at it very closely, it's actually him looking at the killer directly, but he didn't notice it at the time because he thought it was probably just a bit of abstract art that was just on this person's wall. But then it turns out that the killer was in plain view the entire time. It's just that he didn't notice. And I thought that was a very clever, you know, misdirect. And it was actually one of those things where I actually found myself going, oh, bravo, Dario Argento, that you actually did something that actually really made me go, oh yeah, that's actually pretty clever. But yeah, that was that's one example. But it's kind of like that, where it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you really think about it. But in many ways, you can still fill in the gaps yourself. Like, he probably, the main character who survives to the very end, probably got out of his restraint, and he obviously, you know, managed to sedate her and apprehend her, and seizing an opportunity to kind of, you know, finish this art piece, but then also kind of, you know, get famous, he decides to basically use her heart, take her heart out, and use that in place of his own. And I thought that was actually a very interesting twist. And of course, that does tend to happen with a lot of giallos. Like, a lot of giallos tend to just end abruptly with no real rhyme or reason. Like, there's a very famous ending. It's not necessarily a giallo, but there's this one instance where where the main characters survive a zombie apocalypse, and then they just get on board this truck or this jeep with this family, and they basically, just start driving away, and then it just cuts to credits. Like, credits just come up, and then all of a sudden it just zooms into one of the characters' faces, and they're basically turned away from the camera, but then they turn around and they've been turned into a demon, or they've been turned into a zombie. So there have been instances of that kind of tradition, that kind of trope in Italian giallo films. So if you're familiar with that kind of structure, you will kind of appreciate a lot of those elements of the storytelling of this particular piece. And I think it's actually a really fun time. A lot of people do tend to criticise the 6th episodes of Inside Number 9s as kind of being a bit underwhelming, but so far, well, with a lot of the episodes, I also tackled, one of the episodes I tackled that was also a Number 9 6th episode installment of an Inside Number 9 episode was Wise Out, and that's one of their best ones, I think, in terms of, how they, tell a really engaging story, and they make it very harrowing and very gritty. But yeah, this one definitely was one of those episodes where the story wasn't very well received, but I have to say it's very well thought out. It's just the ending just left a lot to be desired for a lot of people. But I think there's a lot that you can look at there that makes you think, oh, well, I can see how he probably would have gotten out of that, or something like that. So there's so many things in there, but I just really like the humour in this episode. There's a lot of great characters. Carrie is definitely the comic relief, I think, in many ways. But then there's also a lot of great scenes between Kenneth Williams and Fiona Shaw's character and various other things. But I also like the fact that during a scene where Patricia is meant to be getting away from the killer, she hides in a bathroom stall and she closes the door, but then she gets out again and she just goes, "I'm sorry, it stinks in there," and then she goes over to the next one. Because even though she's running for her life to, escape this killer, escape certain death, she's still able to, say, "Oh, no, I'm not going to put up with stench. Like, I have to go into a much more hygienic one to get away from the killer." But I like the fact that she never had the thought to put a phone on silent, or she didn't ask anyone to put a phone on silent throughout most of it, or just, on vibrate or something like that, so that she didn't have to activate, so when she's activating the voice search, the killer wouldn't hear her. But yeah, that was one of those things where I felt like, yeah, she's visually impaired, so she obviously won't think about doing that, because when you're in fight or flight, you tend to not think about things in a lot of ways. So yeah, I really did like this episode. This was a lot of fun. It is a funny episode, so I would say if you like your comedy dark, I would go for this episode right off the bat. But then there's also other episodes I like that I'd like to review. But yeah, I really do like this episode, and I wanted to give this a proper review, because I feel like this is the one that when people do talk about private viewing, they don't really talk about it with any kind of sense of, well, they do talk about it with a certain sense of they like it or they enjoy it, but they always have, this very, very keen sense of, the ending just kind of leaves a lot to be desired. But I think that's the whole entire point of the episode. The whole entire point of the episode is it's meant to fill in those gaps and give you that twist. But it also is paying homage to the Italian giallo genre as well. So yeah, I think that's a very important aspect about this episode, is that if you know the style very well and you know how it's structured and how it's presented, couple that with the closed circle trope of a lot of Agatha Christie mysteries, you definitely can appreciate a lot of stuff with this episode. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments, and let me know what other Inside Number 9 episode you'd like me to review for the second Inside Number 9 review that I'm planning on doing. So let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode and what you thought of the ending, and I hope you're all having a very good day. This has been Joshua with Whimsical and Interesting Musings. Take care, bye bye for now.